Greetings, welcome back to my channel. Family, it's been a while. I know I haven't dropped a video in quite a while, but I just wanted to discuss a story that I just saw which pertains to Vybz Kartel. Apparently, the promoter of his Trinidad show is now taking him to court to sue Vybz Kartel for $200 million. Now, I know that sounds outrageous, and I know that the show in its entirety was not going to make $200 million. So I know they're not speaking about US currency. I think they're actually speaking about Trinidadian currency, right? I will have to do some further research to see if this is indeed the case. But if you can remember, last year, Vybz Kartel had a show, and I think there was an issue of the balance of the payment not being sent to him. And so, as Vybz Kartel was in town, did not receive his payment, he followed the advice of his management and his team and decided that he would not perform and that he would leave. And, many fans took to social media, started to criticize Vybz Kartel. But namely, the promoter actually went public and started to criticize Kartel right away. If you can remember, many persons were calling for Vybz Kartel to return the payment so that the promoter can actually recoup some of, I guess, what he was losing by not having Cartel perform, right? And what I would like to say, family, when this situation happened, I don't know if persons saw my comments on the numerous videos about the topic, but I was of the view that Vybz Cartel's management and team led Cartel in the wrong direction with regard to this show. This was Cartel's first show in Trinidad after being released from prison. Fans, needless to say, fans had a lot of anticipation of this performance. They wanted to see World Boss on the stage. They wanted to see him perform the various songs that they heard while he was in prison. They wanted to hear some of the classics from the early 2000s that they haven't seen performed live. And, I felt that what they had sent Cartel up to Showtime was significant enough that it should have allowed him to perform. And, after the duration of the show, after everything was completed, I believe that the promoters and whoever sponsored the show would have been able to pay the balance, right? If I'm not mistaken, they had sent up to, I think, 750,000, if I'm not mistaken. And this was just shy of what Cartel wanted for the show, right? But, it's distressing for many of the fans to see that after making a victorious comeback into the entertainment scene, after, you know, overcoming a significant prison sentence and still coming out with all of his faculties in order, many fans were distressed that they see Cartel now facing a hefty lawsuit, right? I believe that his management was a little too money hungry right then. I'm not gonna blame TJ. I'm not gonna blame Scatterbarrel, but whoever was informing Cartel at the time, whoever was advising him, I believe they were in error, because here it is, a substantial amount of money has been paid. Right? This isn't something in which this is not a show that Cartel is performing by himself. There's a slew of other artists that were a part of it. Right? So it's not like the expectation was for Cartel to perform for 2 hours. He could have performed, with the 750,000, he should have performed a scaled down version of his show, cut out a half hour, cut out 20 minutes, whatever the case is, but give the fans a taste of what it is that they wanted, you know. But I've seen a lot of speculation about whether or not this is going to turn out well for Cartel. and persons are saying that his legal team would have advised him that he was within his right to leave with the payment. I know that's how it works for many other artists. If you would have sent them a down payment and the show was canceled, or you weren't able to carry out the exact vision that you wanted, um, artists are permitted to take their deposit, um, because as you can look at the situation that took place with Kraft and the Gallaudet Bounce show, right? Kraft rightly pointed out that even though he hasn't performed at the Gallaudet Bounce show, he had a team that he had to mobilize. He had his stylists, he had his security, he had persons that did the logistics, that would have gotten him everything he needed to see to it that the show takes place. And so after you would have mobilized these persons, caused them to take flights, or actually they didn't fly out yet, but the point is he had already sent his team in motion, and their time is actually for a fee. He's not getting volunteer work, right? And so the reality is, whatever you would have sent them as a down payment had to actually be used to facilitate his team doing all they needed to do to prepare for his show. All right. And so in the case of Vybz Kartel, I don't think it's any different. Vybz Kartel has a highly professional team that he takes with him. And after you would have taken time out of Kartel's schedule, you know, it is now irreversible, right? Because persons have to think about the opportunity cost, right? It's possible that on the same date when Kartel performed in Trinidad, that there was also another show that he could have done and made maybe twice what he would have received up to showtime, right? Because Cartel's rate is 1.5 million. So if you would have paid him 750,000, you have to recognize that there was also another show he could have done elsewhere. And so when he considers it, it was actually a loss for Cartel. He could have went somewhere else and received his full payment of 1.5 million. But here it is, you now have thrown a wrench in his schedule and caused him to now have to cancel plans for shows elsewhere, right? And so, I think they both have a case. I think they both have um, something justifiable to say about it. On one hand, the promoter obviously would have invested, and he would have had his patrons who would have invested in the show, and he would have liked for his main event, the main act, to be there. But at the same time, like I said, Cartel also has a perspective that needs to be considered, because here it is now, that seed money that you would have sent in advance obviously will now play a role in him mobilizing his staff. Obviously, accepting one show means that he didn't go to another show which could have been equal to or more lucrative than the one in Trinidad. All right, family. And so just wanted to weigh in on this situation. I think so. After the show concluded, I believe that the promoter can also say that Vybz Kartel's name was a huge part of the show actually going on, a huge part of the crowd actually showing up, and so that's another thing that they don't really factor in. The fact is he used his name to promote the show, even though he didn't perform. The point is, persons actually showed up to see Vybz Kartel. They may not have come to see those other artists, you know. But family, let me know your thoughts in the comments below about all these dynamics. One love.